Hi, Professor Wills here. So we've been taking a look at architecture of the late Roman Empire for our art history class, our survey of the ancient world, and we're starting to see a major change, and that is on the religious front. We're seeing the abandonment of the pantheon of gods and goddesses that were worshipped in temples by the early and high empire period Romans. Then along comes Constantine in the late empire. He becomes a Christian, credits all of his success in unifying the empire to his one God, and becomes not only the builder of monuments, but also of churches. So we're seeing the Roman invention of cement, of these different systems of vaults used in innovative ways to create bigger and more innovative leaps in architecture. Let's do a quick flashback of what was accomplished under Constantine, and then I'll show you one more thing that's associated with his reign. That's a mausoleum dedicated to his sister, who would later become a church. But it really takes architecture into a new direction with a more centrally focused plan. That we saw a little bit with the Pantheon in the High Empire period, but this is going to be a direction in architecture that will inform all church building, particularly in the East, not so much in Western Europe, but in the East. And when Constantine moves the capital to Constantinople in present-day Istanbul, there'll be a fantastic example I'll show you of a large-scale, centrally designed planned church in that location when it becomes the hub of the Byzantine Empire. But let's start small. Now, I've also hinted previously that we're starting to see a transition in architecture from exterior embellishment toward an interior embellishment, because the goal with Christian churches, of course, and different sanctuaries, where people are memorialized, is to get people inside, not have them be educated about religion or leadership, that kind of thing, from outside. So that's another thing to keep in mind as I pivot to our PowerPoints without further ado. All right, last time around, of course, we took a look at architecture under Constantine, and very quickly we looked at what did sit once upon a time in Vatican City in Rome. Was a small church, although really it could hold some 3,000 to 4,000 people, called Old St. Peter's. So we took a look at this. It was torn down during the Renaissance. Michelangelo was one of the architects involved in creating a huge mega church, which is what you see when you watch the Pope on the news or various sermons. That is what replaced it. But this was an important archetype for Christian churches, particularly what would eventually spring up all over Western Europe in the medieval world, and that is Old St. Peter's, that you can see from a bird's eye view. Is a reference by intent to a Christian cross, reminding the viewer about the sacrifice of people like Jesus and even St. Peter himself being crucified. And what you find also is a continued sort of central access, taking you to the apse or altar end of the church. Remember, this looks like a little bit like a letter T. This element here running perpendicular is the transept. This is where all the saints' relics and very significant holy objects would be displayed or stored. And then people would be organized to watch or hear sermons from the aisles. That's what number 2 is. Number 1 is not the aisle. I know we like to say walking down the aisle. That's the nave of the church. So some quick architectural lingo. And the idea, again, is to get people inside. So that's going to change architecture to accommodate that Christian mandate. Now, another thing we saw, of course, another structure in Constantine's era that is long, that has a front entrance, and it concludes with another kind of projected rounded apse, was the Basilica Constantine, or the Basilica Nova. This, too, built in the 4th century, employs some of the architectural vaulting and cement that allowed them to have structural strength and integrity, based on the simple arch concept, which allows the weight to not only channel centrally but down the sides as well. And then when you project that shape, you create like a tunnel. You create a barrel vault. If you intersect 2 barrel vaults, you get a groin vault. And essentially what you have is a repeat of 3 groin vaults, taking to an enormous statue of Emperor Constantine himself. This is not a place of worship, although he looks like a god. This was a government building, but its enormity, its monumental size, as you can see the teeny tiny people here in the rendering, underscores the incredible leap architecture has taken forward at this point in time. So what else is going on? Well, what you find here is a building called the Mausoleum of Santa Costanza. And this also dates from the middle of the 4th century. And this is what I wanted to introduce you to, the central plan design. Previously, with the Basilica Nova and Old St. Peter's, we were looking at something what you would call a longitudinal design, meaning it's longer than it is wide. Now we're focusing on something that's round, like a rotunda that has a central focus or plan design, and I'll show you that architectural plan coming up next. But you can see from the outside a very attractive brick building, but not a lot of embellishments. We're not seeing sculptural reliefs or paintings or anything like that, like we would have seen with some of our other civilizations in this class. Inside, what you can see under the dome is this circular space. This is where the sarcophagus of Costanza would have resided. Now, Costanza, who was that? That was the sister of Constantine. So this was a mausoleum dedicated to his, and to honor his beloved sister. It's there's a ring of pairs of Corinthian columns that encircle it. But what I want to draw your attention mostly to is the walkway that encircles that focal point. They sort of have a rotunda or a peristyle rotunda for the sarcophagus, but the walkway is something I want to draw your attention to because it's here in this architectural plan. So here are those pairs of columns to which I referred, and I'll come back to you here. This is where you find a walkway that encircles that space, and that's called an ambulatory. And an ambulatory is a ring-like barrel vaulted corridor. So again, because of the invention of the barrel vault and because of its strength and that it can channel weight effectively, they were able to run this continuous circular barrel vault around that mausoleum space with a central focus on the star of the show, to whom the mausoleum was dedicated to, Constantine's sister, Costanza. Here's sort of a side view here. Again, there are the columns. Here's the domed space. It's contained within almost a sloped roof, kind of encased in brick, but there would have been a mix of both cement and marble and brick to construct this space. Now, I call it central plan design in church architecture. Later, Santa Costanza would be used and is still used as a church, but in the 4th century, it was a mausoleum dedicated to that prominent member of the imperial family. All right, let's take a look at what that ambulatory looks like. So if we, so again, focus, here's an altar now in today's world as the space is used as a church, but of course the sarcophagus would have been what sat here in antiquity. Moving to the ambulatory that encircles that whole space, you look up and you can see a curved space. That is your continuous, I guess you can call it your infinity barrel vault, but we know it's been on the architectural kind of menu of the Roman Empire for quite a while. But what you start to see new at this point in the 4th century is, as I mentioned, this focus on not exterior decoration, but interior. And it's here the craze for decorating in mosaic begins. So, moving on, looking upward in that ambulatory vault, what you might find is a mosaic that looks something like this. So, in the center of the composition, you have a portrait of the deceased, Costanza herself, but it's almost swallowed up in a pattern of botanical grape leaves and vines, intertwining and curving and moving throughout the composition. Now, here and here, if you were to go back a century, for instance, or maybe even 50 years, the Roman viewer of this scene would think it has to do with Roman mythology. As I've written down here, Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, was extremely popular, right? He had, celebratory connotations, but we are now in Christian times, and so the interpretation for the 4th century viewer would be the Roman god of wine being analogous to the ceremony of the Eucharist and the blood of Christ. So it's very interesting. It's a lot like the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus, where at first glance it looks so old school Roman, but then when you think about the space and the context of the times, and why are they, including a Roman god in a sanctuary built by a Christian emperor for his likely Christian sister? Then you start to see what they're doing is they're adapting something from the past to a more Christian interpretation. So you can see all of Bacchus's little purple minions conducting a grape harvest here, loading up the barrel, likely kind of stomping on the grapes and having a great time here. But again, it's meant to really reference Christ, even though we're not seeing Jesus there in the composition. But much like we've seen in the ancient world, you have, basically a large scene framed by abstract patterns, all done in mosaic. Again, small stones, colored glass, meticulously laid and applied, a very durable choice, and a considered sort of expensive and more kind of a luxe choice compared to fresco painting. All right, that's it for now. We'll continue taking a look at central plan architecture as we transition from late antiquity and early Christian art to the Byzantine Empire. Stay tuned.